Hi folks, my name's Jim Foster. It's my honor to be the chair of the AT Hall of Fame Committee. I have to say I'm a bit intimidated because of some really well-known folks from the AT like Warren Doyle and Larry Luxembourg, who I think I don't really fit with them. And also I just learned there's an IT professional here, and that really intimidates me because I'm supposed to be what passes for the IT guy here, and trust me, I'm not. So it's a delight to see all of you here today. I'm not sure how well the video is going to turn out, but Becky, our videographer, I'm sure is going to do Becky's going to do a great job. We don't have any power here because a tree fell across the power line, and it's likely to be a long time before we get power. This afternoon, we're going to have the Hall of Fame induction ceremony up at the Army Heritage Education Center in Carlisle, which we refer to as the AHEC. I'm sure the AHEC has power, and actually I've talked to somebody who lives near the AHEC who assures me there is power up there. But here, we're on battery power and no lights, and we'll just see how it works. So we are going to talk to some of the inductees of the Appalachian Trail Hall of Fame, and we're going to start with Tom Speaks. Tom is a 2022 Hall of Fame inductee, and Tom, if you would come up and sit here, that would be great. And I'm going to move this mic. Larry Luxembourg, the founder and president of the museum, and I are going to be doing the interviews. Tom was inducted last year, and one of the things we've tried to do with the Hall of Fame is kind of check several boxes in terms of important people on the important roles that people have played on the Appalachian Trail. You know, we've had the pioneers, you know, the Myron Averys, the Benton Mackays. Those folks were in our charter class. We've had people who were extremely important in getting funding for the trail and supporting the trail as it grew and became more popular. We've had people who played important roles in supporting hikers, like Tilly Wood, for example, just to name one. We've had people who've done a great job of educating hikers, teaching them how to do their thing in a good way, and Warren Doyle is one of those people. Ed Garvey was another who was in our charter class. Tom Speaks checks another box. Tom Speaks spent most of his career with the U.S. Forest Service. And the Forest Service and the other federal agencies, other than the Park Service, have played a very important role. And Tom is the first person that we inducted who played that role. So, and Tom was inducted in 2022, was unable to make it in 2022, and was able to make it this year. And so we asked him if he'd consent to be interviewed by us. I'll tell you a little bit about Tom, and then I want to ask Tom some questions. Tom began his career with the Forest Service as an AT Ridge Runner, which is kind of cool. I think we have some other folks here who've been AT Ridge Runners in the past. He had a 35-year career in a variety of roles. He was on the Forest Service's AT land acquisition team in the 90s, and he also was a legislative assistant for the chairman of the House Interior Appropriations Committee. So Tom, to start out, why did you become an Appalachian Trail Ridge Runner?
When I was in college, I had an opportunity to find a job that was also a passion. And I remember planning today, them providing me a backpack, a tent, and 5 days a week being on the trail. and I'm saying they'll pay you to do this. And I was like, yeah, I'm in, I'll do that. New backpack, new sleeping bag, which I never had either new, and payment to work on the trail, meet hikers, solve issues. That was a no-brainer, and I'm sure it would have been for most of you too. So that's how I started out.
Can you briefly talk about your career in the Forest Service and the kinds of positions that you held within the Forest Service?
Yeah, I'm a forester, Virginia Tech graduate forester, and started in forestry. And it was at a time that Appalachian Trail acquisition was a major emphasis in the Forest Service in the South especially. And I was fortunate to work in an area, Blacksburg, where the trail was on a lot of roads and private land. So there was a lot of opportunity to deal with landowners, purchase land, move the trail. And that was my really first intense position with the Forest Service. And also some of the people that are also former Hall of Fame inductees worked side by side with Pam Underhill, Dave Startzel, Dave Sherman, so many folks that that bond was very strong for me, and I really enjoyed that relationship. So that's how it started.
As an AT thru hiker myself, I saw in your resume that among the land acquisitions that you were responsible for were just some of the iconic places on the AT, Rocky Fork, Spy Rock, Max Patch, and the Roan Highlands. Is there one or two of those in particular that you'd like to talk about, the process of acquiring that land?
Sure. Towards Rocky Fork, I was a forest supervisor at that time. The last 12 years of my career, I was a forest supervisor, and happened to be timing-wise that I came back as forest supervisor on the Cherokee in Tennessee. Ran 30 years before I tried to work to acquire Rocky Fork, and it didn't happen, which had about, I guess 8 miles of the Appalachian Trail on that property. It's a 10,000 acre tract of land. All kind of benefits, including protection of the trail, trout streams, a massive piece of land undeveloped. So working with state, local partners, private individuals, county government, we were finally able to pull that together. It's about a $40 million acquisition, and that was just a very kind of the pinnacle of the career of a large tract that most people that hike the AT know that property.
Yeah, that's near Unicoi, right?
Unicoi, yeah. Northeast Tennessee.
Yes. Yeah, I was just there because the AT Vista was there, and I went on a hike, probably on some of the land that you acquired. So there's a story, I hope it's true, because it's such a good story, about how you were able to persuade a farmer to allow his land to be used for the AT, and you met him and he was haying. Do you want to tell that story?
Yes, and so what I'll advise, as all of you probably know, don't believe anything you read. Especially when it's about you. However, I would characterize that, how it was written up, as a conflation of total truths. And the truth is, that story did not have to do with Rocky Fork. Rocky Fork was a completely different, neat and trying acquisition, but the hay story is true. And where that occurred in Southwest Virginia, and an area known as Brushy Mountain in Bland County, where there's about 5 miles of road walking, had been forever. The agency that had tried to acquire the land short of eminent domain hadn't had any luck, so I came on the scene. There was like 20 different landowners that owned the ridge top. I struck out at first with all of them, but in all my conversation, I found out there was one person that they all looked up to, one landowner. So I was out there one day, and I saw him out in the field putting up hay. And me spending my summers doing stuff like that, climbing tobacco, picking hay, mowing hay. I saw him, and I just parked and went out there in the field and started pitching hay up on the wagon with him. And he was all by himself. He was probably about 60 years old. And, you know, that's back when we did square bales, and that was not easy work. So after about an hour, he didn't say anything to me. I didn't say anything to him. And,
Free labor, huh?
Yeah. He may have saw the Forest Service truck, but other than that, nothing. Then he said to me, he sat down, he said, "So, why are you here?" And we chatted. He actually invited me back to his house the next day. And we sat down and started the work of where we came to an agreement on his property, and every landowner there, 19 out of 20, fell in line over a year, and we purchased the land, we moved the trail, and that's that story. So all of it true, but it was a conflation of stories there.
So the folks who are acquiring corridor, they need to go looking for farmers haying and offer to hay.
Yeah,
that
sure.
Seems to be the secret there.
I'm out of my prime, so don't ask me to help you.
Larry, did you have any questions?
So I know some of the acquisitions were very difficult, and there were even like threats on occasion. Did you have any like really difficult circumstances when you were considering acquisitions?
Sure. When I first sat down here, because of the community, I first thought, wow, this is just like an eminent domain proceeding, and I'm sitting on the list down there.
We're friendlier than
Yeah. Fortunately, I did not have to do many of those, but talked to Don King, he had to do plenty of those. But tremendous stories, because over my tenure, probably bought maybe 150 different properties, meaning you go into people's houses, you may be at corporate headquarters, various situations. I've been threatened, all of those things that I love Pam Underhill's stories, but she and I were working in the same county, Park Service, Forest Service, and she was being threatened on one end of the county, and I was being threatened on the other. So she took a little heat off of me. But when you ask that, one, that I wasn't threatened, but how buying land was such a roller coaster of emotion. You'd think you'd have something and it'd fall through. And it was like when you buy a house or sell a house. And we were dealing with the James River crossing there in Virginia, of where we were trying to acquire the piers in the river bottom from the railroad. And we had been working with the railroad, working with them, and finally one day, this is after 2 or 3 years, I'm on the phone with another person dealing with their corporate attorney in Jacksonville, and their public affairs person finally brought us together, let us appraise, do this and that. And that attorney decided to show that he was the boss, and he just wore me out over the phone and told me that that will never happen. We're not granting that to the AT. And we had all kind of money lined up to grant the AT had for the bridge crossing, and it was all waiting on us to finish this acquisition. Hung up the phone, and I was like, oh my, what are we going to do? How are we going to tell anybody this? Well, the next day, the vice president of the railroad called me and said, I would like to apologize for the behavior of our attorney. We will be donating that property and making a donation to the Appalachian Trail for this, because we know that this is for the benefit of everybody. And the public affairs officer that was on the phone was so embarrassed, she leaked about 2 supervisors and went and saw the vice president, told him what happened. He said, that's not going to stand. So that was that emotional roller coaster. One night I'm like, oh my, and the next day it's like, oh my.
So that, I think, is the longest pedestrian bridge on the AT, the footbridge. And this guy was the first hiker to go across that bridge, even before the bridge was completely finished.
Oh, really? Congratulations. Yeah.
Nimblewill Nomad.
Yes, I know who you are, but I didn't know that story.
Yeah. Well, anyway, he was very grateful that he didn't have to jump from pier to pier.
That's a long jump, yeah, sure enough.
So anyway, that one has a happy ending.
Yes, for all of us.
Yeah. There any pieces of your career involved with the AT that really stand out? Not just acquisitions, but encounters with trail groups or hikers that really gave you a sense of pride and appreciation for your work preserving the AT.
Sure, I mean, going back to being a ridge runner, knowing it was a passion, and today some of my funnest or things that make me look back is when I had my kids with me, like Alan Rockford, my son's an avid hiker. He's been all the way to Nepal, to the AT. He lives in Portland now. And my daughter, who is following me at Virginia Tech, when I had them out with me and we're on the trail, I mean, that really makes me feel good that they appreciate it as much as all of you all do. And the friendships I made with trail hikers and with the ATC and such are still friendships today. Dave Startles and Dave Shermans and the Pam Underhills that I mentioned and more. Don King and I had a pleasant rivalry for years. No, I bought that. And nobody can compete with Don, but it was always a pleasure to do so. And those relationships still today, when Ron Tipton called me last year and said, I have an announcement, you're being inducted into the AT Hall of Fame, and I want to give a list of names. And once you read the names of people I've read about and then many that are friends, I was like, well, why are you inducting me into this? And I was so honored by that. So with that, my friendships, my children especially, have an appreciation. Those are the things that are most endeared to me.
Well, you've mentioned Virginia Tech a couple times, and I want to tell you some of the museum's involvement with Virginia Tech. So an early thru hiker hiked with Model T is in charge of the woodworking operation at Virginia Tech, but an adjunct professor who worked with him, a professor of wood science, produced a couple of signs we have outside at the
Very nice.
So they're kind of plain signs, but I like the idea that they were produced by somebody who has a doctorate in wood science from a German university and also served at Virginia Tech for a couple of years. So we have 2 signs produced at Virginia Tech.
Oh, nice.
Go Hokies.
Go Hokies, absolutely.
Yeah.
5 hour and 55-minute rain delay in yesterday's football game. That resulted in a loss.
And I can vouch for the mess in the southwestern Virginia. When I thru hiked in 1980, Mike Dawson, who was
dear friend,
the regional rep, he'd just taken over in Newport, and I was part of the first group to sleep on his porch.
Oh, really?
Yeah, before he headed out west. But anyway, we had to make a U-turn going into to Newport and walk on roads, and it was a really messy trail back then. So appreciate your work and redoing the trail down there.
You're welcome. It's just an honor to be here with you and to be inducted into the Hall of Fame.
Now, as a ridge runner, there wouldn't have been many, at least long-distance hikers in the 70s. What were kind of your experiences then compared with your impression of hikers today?
The equipment definitely was different then. There was, and you would know that, there was some packs that looked like this old military rucksacks. Mr. Schaefer and others, it looked exactly like that. That's one thing I noticed. And then several times helping people get oriented that, how did you end up here? The trail is about 4 miles this way, like that. And they're going, oh no, and then get my truck, and I hit my ride, which I wasn't supposed to do, but I do it anyway. Get out here and proceed north or wherever they were headed. Finding the trail was difficult back then, and that's one thing I noticed, equipment, and I don't want to say ease, but just knowing where you're at on the ground was a lot different to me.
Well, we're incredibly grateful for the work you've done. When the Appalachian Trail was laid out, much of the area around it was wilderness, but the eastern United States has changed dramatically since then, and without your work to acquire the corridor, it would probably all be a road walk or something similar to a road walk. And so all of us who've hiked all or a portion of the AT are incredibly grateful for the work that you've done, and that's, you asked the question of why we're inducting you, because you did unbelievably vital work to preserve the AT. So thank you for coming, Tom. We look forward to seeing you this afternoon.
Appreciate it. I'll be there.
Brian is not a stranger to the AT Hall of Fame because Brian has been on the selection committee, I believe, since the very beginning. I believe since early 2001 when we first had this crazy idea. And
2011.
2011, that's what I meant. Let me say that and I'll talk more about this afternoon, but all of us on the committee really have a great deal of respect for Brian, and some of us decided a while ago that because Brian, in part because Brian had retired from ATC, that it was time to induct him. One of those committee members was not Brian King, who was in favor of his induction, and I guess I'm the only person who is privy to all of the election results, so to speak, when we elect members. And Brian never voted for himself at any stage of the process, but despite that, he was easily elected to this year's class of the Hall of Fame. I think that gives you some idea of the respect that he's held in by the folks on the Hall of Fame selection committee. This was not an inside baseball kind of thing at all, as was the case when we elected Larry Luxembourg. That was essentially a secret that we withheld from Larry until we sprung it on him that we had elected him. Brian, my research indicates that you began first as a volunteer for ATC for several years before you actually became employed by ATC. I wonder if you could talk about how it is that you got involved with the AT project.
Well, it was a combination of, I first got involved by helping with the magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't totally volunteer because I got paid $10 an issue or something like that.
Okay.
But then that evolved into volunteering with the board's public relations committee for several years, and then went on the staff in 1987. It's an outgrowth of that previous work, and I've known Dave Startzel and Judy Jenner for a long time, and when Dave became executive director, and he reorganized the staff a little bit and opened up, well, he called it associate director, but I didn't like that very much, so it was director of public affairs, since that's what I was doing, was public facing things.
When you joined ATC as an official employee, what were your duties there, and how did they evolve?
Very different from the structure it has now. It was basically Dave's number two, but I had membership, public relations, publications, information services, and a little bit of dabbling on facilities maintenance, taking out the trash. So, it was a smaller organization there.
Oh, yeah.
And that continued for the first 18 years.
Let's talk a little bit about the Hall of Fame and your involvement with it. You're not the only person who does this, but you're one of the most important people who kind of brings to light some of the lesser-known figures of the Appalachian Trail that most of us haven't heard of. Look, I don't know that you brought forward Dr. Rentschler, but Dr. Rentschler is an example of that.
Yeah, he is an example, and it's funny, Barry was saying that he stepped out of the way in the photos. What he really did was step in the shadows, because all the photos we have of him, that's just all shadow.
Yeah.
No, that goes back to when I first started on the staff there, and that one of first assignments I had was to, they had a member handbook. It needed to be redone. It hadn't been done in 10, 15 years. And that got me into the archives room, which was basically a landfill at the time. So Larry did his research there. He'll testify to that. Digging into that history, and I'm not a historian. Let's get that out. I'm a storyteller. Don't like footnotes, and I don't have the credentials. But digging into that, the history up to that point was basically written by Marion Avery. And, you know, the winners write the history. And it just seemed a little too much myth-making in there. And so digging through the archives, and, you know, to this day, when I open up a box or something else in there or read letters, I learn things that I didn't know or contradicted what I thought I knew. And so that's where it really started. You come across all these people that never were mentioned before that did important things, like in Pennsylvania or down in Virginia or in the Smokies. I mean, the old history never mentioned Horace Kephart and George Massa who, in the thing, or some of the people in Georgia that sooner or later will be in there. So that's where it stems from. And then when y'all formed the Hall of Fame committee, that's what we talked about. And as Larry always says, he keeps forgetting to record our meetings. It's great storytelling when you got Dave Sherman in there and Dave Field and people like that. And that's how a lot of these people came to me. More modern ones, of course, it's people we worked with. But there are a lot of stories out there that still have to be written and spoken and put in the Hall of Fame.
So part of your job was learning AT history,
Yeah.
but obviously you took it further, much further than the job required. So how did you develop that passion for AT history?
Well, AT history and ATC history, they're congenital twins. The more I dug into it, but when I first started with ATC and looked at the structure and the goals and the objectives and all that, on paper it's something that shouldn't work. You know, there's no way this works, but it does. And so that just piqued my curiosity, and so you start getting into all these people and how they work together or didn't work together. And you know the stories about Avery and Mackay, their battles, but there's more to it than just personality difference, and that's in the record. And so that's sort of where I wanted to take it, is to get rid of the myth and get it a little closer to reality. And you know, made mistakes all along the way, and I'd go and find another piece of paper that said, nah, there's another angle here that you missed before. So that's what I tried to do, is you know, what's total truth. That's, you're never going to get there, but The thing of it is, it takes a lot of people to do what the AT does, and I'll talk about that a little this afternoon, is, you know, no one person in the AT project did it all by himself or herself. And, you know, speaking of unknown people, people don't know that a woman set up the first AT conference, got it going, gave them office space for a long time. And nobody, how many here has ever heard of Harley Ann James?
We elected her to the Hall of Fame
Yeah.
several years ago, but.
That's an example of somebody no one has ever heard of.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there's others who a lot of people have heard of, and not always the accurate things. And so it's good to bring that to light. You know, we can all tell stories about Warren. Is this true? Is that true?
So to follow up on the first part of that comment, you say the project shouldn't have worked. You know, you have this 2,000-mile blank spot on the map. So kind of what do you mean it shouldn't have worked?
Okay. At various stages. One, getting it on the ground and through all these private landowners. And I don't remember the numbers specifically for the Forest Service, but when it got to acquisition time, you're talking close to 3,000 different landowners. We didn't want the whole tract, we wanted a piece of the tract. How's that going to happen? You know, the Park Service had never done that before, ever. And when it came time to put things into law, there was resistance from the agencies because we have what they're called square parks. We don't have linear parks. How do you manage that? What's it going to cost? We don't have money for that. And then you look at, you know, in the structure of management, we've got 14 states, different agencies in each state. Like here in Pennsylvania, there are memorandums of understanding with the federal agencies, ATC, and states. Here in Pennsylvania, that takes 14 signatures. You know, some of them are great, parks people, you know, the environmental DNR, and the state police are great. Others, not so much. And then you have towns. And then you got, over the years, a varying number of clubs, you know, 31 now, or 30. And you have a idea that they're all independent, by definition don't want to work together. They don't, you know, Avery was great for saying you're going to do it this way. And, you know, that didn't go over well with, you know, people in Maine, people in Georgia. So you got the two ends, not too happy about that. So you got all that on paper and say, this can't work. You can draw circles and Venn diagrams and all that other kind of crap. But it does work. Because the binding element is the trail itself. And so that affection for the trail is what makes people work together. Otherwise, they never would. I mean, there were committees formed, councils formed and all that, and generated a lot of paper, but it didn't generate the work that got the trail on the ground, keeps it on the ground. And it's not just footpaths, it's, you know, it's more than footpath. It's all that land around it. And that's how it's evolved back to Mackay's original thinking, which was preserving nature. So now you have climate change, and this is, you know, the trail is the source of water for millions of people. It's in danger. A lot of the species on the trail are endangered or threatened. And so that's the job of the trail community now, to secure and protect what a few years ago we called Wild East. And it's important, and it doesn't have to be just hikers, because I'm sure everybody here is familiar with the Mountain Valley Pipeline problem. And one of the things that went on in that discussion and political discussion was the people in those counties, in Virginia especially, not so much in West Virginia, they go out on their porch and they look up and that's what they see and that's what they want protected. And that's what the trail community is all about too. And so we have friends who don't hike. They may hunt on the trail, but they don't hike. And that's the view they want to see when they get up in the morning.
Larry, other questions, Larry?
So for many years, you were the spokesman for ATC, and some of that had to be uncomfortable or difficult. What are some of your most memorable times as ATC spokesman?
Memorable? Well, let's clarify for people here. The difficult times, I mean, anybody can write press releases and, talk pleasant things, but what I was mainly involved in was handling the press after murders. And in a previous life, I was a newspaper reporter and editor for about 12 years, mostly with the Associated Press in Washington. So I came out of that background and I know what reporters are looking for. And we're not law enforcement, so we have to defer and help and reinforce law enforcement. So that's a juggling match. And most of the time it worked. Made a big mistake one time with the New York Times. The guy asked, and he's now left the Times, thankfully. He made a comment about, well, why is everybody so excited about this? And he got into the Trails Cathedral and murder in the cathedral kind of thing. And I said something about, if this happened on the Upper West Side, nobody would get excited about it. That was the same weekend that a woman was brutally attacked in Central Park on the Upper West Side. So I learned from that. Lots of mistakes get made.
That's a funny comment you make. So I thru-hiked in 1980 and moved to the Upper West Side immediately the day after my thru-hike. And people were asking me how dangerous the trail was.
Yeah.
And within a month, there were 2 murders on one night, a few blocks north of me and a few blocks south, that didn't even make the papers.
Right. Or if it did, it was back there. Well, it wouldn't make the Times. It would make the Daily News. Definitely make the Post.
The Daily News and Post.
Yeah, Daily News and Post. But no, actually, the thing out of those 35 years that I'm probably proudest of is back in the late 70s, 4 young women were brutally gang raped on Buck Mountain in Tennessee by the Oaks brothers and their friends. And that very next weekend, the club moved the trail so they could say it wasn't on the trail. And these 4 young women felt shunned out of the trail community, that they had harmed the trail. I mean, these are juniors in high school going in to be seniors. And about 20 years later, through a little process, they called in for some information. They were looking for maps from that time, and talked to Lori Pottinger, who, had my back for 30-some years, and she bounced it to me. And anyway, we connected with them and got them back as ATC members, and some other things, and got them set up with the club, and the club took them back, and they sort of reclaimed the mountain. And that's the thing. for the most part.
Good. Well, we look forward to
Good.
what you have to say this afternoon.
Good, thank you.
I don't often disagree with what Brian has to say, but I'm going to disagree with one thing. I do consider Brian to be the trail's leading historian, whether or not he has all the pieces of paper that he thinks a historian needs to have. You're a wonderful historian and an incredible resource for I know on the Hall of Fame committee, and I'm sure in other contexts as well. So,
Thank you, Jim, and
Okay.
thank you.
next we're going to talk about Dr. Rentschler. I'm a lifelong Pennsylvanian, and I think that Dr. Rentschler is one of the lesser known really important people in the early history of the Appalachian Trail. Harry Rentschler. I'll tell you a little bit about him, and then I'm going to ask Barry, who's with the Blue Mountain Eagle Climbing Club, to fill in some of the blanks. Harry Rentschler spent most of his life in and around Reading, Pennsylvania. For those of you not from here, it's just outside of the Philadelphia suburbs. It's in southeastern Pennsylvania, just outside of the Philadelphia suburbs, and he was a physician who had a practice there, and before the AT was built, he had developed a group of his friends who were in a hiking club, and they named that club the Blue Mountain Eagle Climbing Club. So the first question that I have for you, Barry, is can you tell the story of how the Blue Mountain Eagle Climbing Club was founded and where the name comes from?
With a long answer or the short answer?
Oh, maybe in the middle.
Dr. Rentschler grew up in Burnville, Pennsylvania, which is just north of the city of Reading. And he roamed the hills and the countryside out there, which is right on the edge of the Kennetenny Ridge, or the Blue Mountain, as it's known. And after he returned from medical school and was practicing, he would often go out and go on short hikes, and he met a local farmer who told him about an eagle's nest that was in the area that was reachable. And Dr. Rentschler was very intrigued by that and kind of filed it in the back of his head. And at some point later on, he had an encounter with a group of gentlemen in the Reading area who would go out and hike up and down the mountain just behind the city of Reading, where the pagoda is, and they would go to the wine gardens up there and have a little wine and walk around, and they called themselves the Fußgängers, and which is a German word for those who walk. And he had this encounter with them and told them the story of the eagle's nest, and they were very intrigued about this, and they said, can we go out and climb the mountain and see this eagle's nest? So Dr. Rentschler made arrangements with the farmer friend, and they went out to take a look at this facility on top of the mountain. And in those days, you had to climb the mountain from the farm. There wasn't the highways that we have and so forth today, where you can motor up to the top of the mountain. And so that's where the term climbing came from. They went up there, they saw the site where the eagle had the nest. It had since been abandoned at that point in time. But they enjoyed it so much, they said, we should do this again. And that was in the springtime. And so they came back in the fall and did it again. And they said, this was so much fun, we should do this on an annual basis. So they decided to start a club, and the club was called the Blue Mountain, and because of the Blue Mountain, the Eagle, because they went to the Eagle, and Climbing Club, because they literally had to climb up in those days, up the side of of the ridge. And so that's how the Blue Mountain Eagle Climbing Club came into existence. And they would have this outing once in the spring and once in the fall, where they would go out to the Eagle's Nest. They would induct new members. They would have speakers, they would sing songs, and then they would go back down into the valley and go to a nearby hotel or restaurant of some sort and have a meal and enjoy the fellowship of each other. And they did that for 10 years. So that's how it got started.
And it's my understanding that that BMAC, as it's commonly known, the Blue Mountain Eagle Climbing Club, was founded in 1916. And sometime after that, Dr. Rentschler learned of Benton Mackay's dream of a trail from Georgia to Maine. Can you talk a little about how they met or got to know each other?
Yeah, it was one of those fall meetings, the October 30th, and I believe it was in 1926, that they went on their hike. And their guest speaker, when they came back down at a local church, was a professor, Eugene Bingham, and he was from Lafayette College. And he told them about this new idea of this long distance path from somewhere in the White Mountains down to maybe somewhere in the Smoky Mountain region. And he told them about this, and at that time they were calling it the Skyline Trail because it was going to go along the skyline. And he encouraged the club to build a trail from the Susquehanna River to the Cumberland River, and that his group was going to work on the trail north of the Lehigh River up to the Delaware Water Gap. And most of the club members thought that was a crazy idea, that this was a very rocky part of Pennsylvania. There was no one land owner. It was owned by many, many different people and so forth. But Dr. Rentschler thought this was just a terrific idea. And so within a month, he put together a group, and they went out to a place that's called the Tri-Corners, which is where Berks County, Lehigh County, and Susquehanna County all come together. If you're familiar with where the Lehigh Water Gap is, this would be just a few miles south of there. They went out there on a cold November day, climbed up to the top of the mountain, had a sign, nailed the sign to the wall, and then a blizzard came in and they quickly scurried back down to the bottom of the hill. But one of the things Dr. Rentschler did was he had an old medical logbook that he had from 1917 that was sitting around in his office, and he started making notes. And he made a note of that date and time, who was on the trip, where they went, and describes it so that you could go back to that particular point. And from that point, for the next 44 months, he led a group of Blue Mountain club members out, and they built the 102 miles of trail in just 44 months.
Yeah, for those of you not as familiar with Pennsylvania as others, it does go 102 miles. The one that Dr. Rentschler and his associates built does go from the Susquehanna River to the Lehigh River. And originally, BMEC maintained that entire section.
Yes.
And I'm actually past president of an AT maintaining club, and I'm involved with another maintaining club as well. We in Pennsylvania, at least many of us, consider BMEC as kind of the father of the AT in Pennsylvania, because it's the oldest club not the oldest club period, but the oldest club that's based in Pennsylvania, and and built over half of the AT in Pennsylvania. I've heard some interesting stories, again, like Thomas speaks, I hope these are true. This was during the Depression when the trail was laid out, and my understanding is that much of the work was volunteer work, but there were some folks who were out of work, and they were paid by Dr. Rentschler to work on the trail. Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, there's not a lot of information. He was very good at keeping records when it came to the trips that they went on and who went on the trip and so forth. But when you say somebody kept a diary, you think, oh, they kept a lot of personal comments and so forth. And he did not do that. So there's very little information that exists as far as his own feedback. And what we do have are comments of other people and comments that were made at his funeral in later years when people were writing up the history. And there were some indications that at times he provided the funds in order to get the fellas out to the trail. The gasoline was in short supply and so forth, and so he compensated a number of people in various ways. And again, being the very kind of quiet individual that he was, I mean, it seems surprising that he would lead the group in doing this major task, but at the same time, he did not make a big deal about the efforts that he personally made, and so he kept that rather quiet.
Larry, what questions do you have?
Well, can you talk a little bit about his legacy in the Arboretum?
Yeah, one of the things that he felt very strongly about was nature and protecting the environment. And the comments that I'm going to make later, I'm going to refer to that. But one of the things that he did is in his will, he left some property that he owned in a cabin that he owned outside of Burnville. And the intention was, and his hope was, that the club would turn this property, which was basically old farm fields and a few trees, turn this property into an arboretum. And so in his will, he left $500 and the request that the club develop an arboretum so that children, school children, could come out, enjoy the benefits of an arboretum with the backdrop of the Blue Mountain in the distance. And as a result of that, there was some, as things go, the husband writes a will, and then if he passes away before the wife might not be in total agreement as to how things go. But there was some wrangling with his wife, but an arrangement was eventually made where the club took over the possession of the Arboretum. And in the 1940s, 1950s, we started planting trees out at that location, and since then have planted more trees. So today we have a arboretum that encompasses 34 acres. It has a lovely view of Blue Mountain. You can sit in the grass and just look at the long line of mountain range. Local people come out and visit it. They come out and eat their lunch there, have picnics and so forth. We have a building at the location. Originally, he had a small cabin. The cabin burned down in about 1969, and a club member donated funds to build a new facility. So we have a clubhouse for the club members now there, and this very nice arboretum. We are actively involved with the Reading School District through the efforts of some of our club members in interacting with the Reading School District and bringing children out to our facility and getting them used to being out of the city and in the woods, and to the point to where they're staying overnight, camping, and so forth. And eventually it will progress to where they go on little backpacking trips in the future. So we're very proud of that facility. I think it's very unique in his facilities that of AT maintaining clubs to have that type of facility as well.
So I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but there's a famous photo of Benton Mackay and Myron Avery together in the mid-30s, and Brian can correct me, but I think this is the only photo we have of the two of them together, and I think it was a Blue Mountain Eagle event.
Yeah, Bake Oven Knob, which is in the northern part of Berks County, before you cross the line into Lehigh to go down to the Lehigh River. Very rocky area, and birders come out there and watch the migration of birds in that area. There is a little farther along is the Bake Oven Knob shelter, which has been there since 1934, 36, something in that neighborhood. Still being used today. But when the Pennsylvania section of the Appalachian Trail was completed, they had a ceremony, and the ceremony was at Bake Oven Knob. And there was a small building there, a caretaker building there at that time. And Dr. Rentschler mentions this in his notes, and he notes who the speakers were at the event. And Myron Avery was there, and Benton Mackay were there. They both spoke. It was somebody, the cameraman, the fellow taking the pictures, got them to get close enough together so that he could take one photo of them, that very famous photo. We have other photos in our archives that shows Benton Mackay speaking, and Dr. Rentschler is standing right next to him. And Myron Avery speaking, and Dr. Rentschler is standing there right next to him. I found it very interesting that, and this is the kind of guy that he probably organized the event and got the speakers, but our president spoke, and some of the other members of the club spoke. Or Professor Bingham from Lafayette spoke, but Harry Rentschler did not speak at the meeting, but he's right there in all these photos. So we're very proud to have those photos still in our existence. They're glass negatives that we have.
You have a photo with
Yeah.
you, or a picture with you. Do you want to talk about that, please?
Yeah, finding a good photo of Dr. Rentschler, again, it's another sign that he did an awful lot of work, but he was always behind the scenes or just to the side. I think when the photos came, he just took a little step to the left or a little step to the right. So he wasn't the main character in photos. And this is about the best photo that we have of him. I have been doing a lot of research with Jefferson Medical School in Philadelphia, trying to find out whether or not they had a professional photo. He was on the staff at Reading Hospital for many years, and when he retired, they held a banquet for him. You know, surely there is a professional photograph of him at the Reading Hospital, but as of yet, I have not been able to uncover that. But this is about the best photo that we have of him. There's another photo that we've uncovered recently where he's standing next, he's actually in Port Clinton, and he's holding on, it looks like he's holding on to the last tree that's there before that came down on the side of the hill and so forth, and he's wearing a winter coat. And so there's not a lot of photos of him. Even the family doesn't have a lot of.
I noticed that when I was doing research on Dr. Rentschler. It's that photo, I think I got that from you or somebody else in BMEC, and that's really the only good photo. The other ones are just really fuzzy and not good at all.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want you to spoil your acceptance this afternoon, but if there's anything else you want to tell us about Dr. Rentschler, we'd love to hear it.
Well, I think one of the funniest things was that when they started the club and they would go up to the eagle's nest, it was a rocky outcropping at the edge of the ridge, and they would go out there and the eagle's nest was down over the side. They would literally tie a rope around people, and they would have to go down, and they would hold the rope, and the person would have to go down the side of the mountain to see where the eagle's nest is. And then if they really liked you, they'd pull you back up. And then you got inducted into the club. So that was something that he endorsed. So I think he had a little bit of a sense of humor in all of that.
Well, one of the things that the AT Hall of Fame is all about is recognizing people who played an important role in the AT and bringing some of those people who may not be as well known to light. And I like to think that maybe we've played a small role in publicizing the important work that Dr. Harry Rentschler did. So look forward to hearing you say more about Dr. Rentschler this afternoon. Thank you very much for coming, Barry.
Okay.
I have to say that there was some question as to whether you were going to make it, and when you were able to confirm that you were able to make it, the number of confirmations that we got just exploded. All these people said, well, I heard Nimblewill coming and I'm a great friend of his, and then there's another email that said, I heard Nimblewill coming and I'm a great friend of his. So we're just delighted that you're here. And I understand that you...
I'm delighted I'm here.
Well, great. I understand you had some health problems, but I hope you're better. Good.
Thank you.
Again, I'm going to talk a little more about Nimblewill Nomad during the induction, but I understand that you were an optometrist, and then you retired and bought a piece of land along Nimblewill Creek, which, as I understand it, is in North Georgia, but just south of Springer Mountain, where the AT has started for several years. Can you talk about how you discovered the AT from your plot of land along Nimblewill Creek?
Yes. Thank you, Jim. Oh, dear friends. Some of you are old enough to understand how we tend to blubber at our age, that we all have lived through it with our parents and grandparents. So I'm probably going to blubber a little bit today, if you'll forgive me.
No problem at all.
I had heard about the AT, and I'd spent some time on the AT, but it never was a particular focus of any great interest in my life because of other obligations, my family, my practice, and so forth. And I guess it was kind of coincidental. I had the opportunity to purchase a piece of land at the base, basically the base of Springer Mountain, which is in the Nimblewill Creek community. And while I was there, I just get frustrated sometimes with how my projects or what I was doing were developing, and I just put on a day pack, and I could go out my back door and pass a red hash mark on a tree, and I was in the national forest. And in about 4 hours, I could bushwhack to the summit of Springer Mountain. And there I was able to sit and regain my composure and understand a little bit more about what my life was and where I thought it ought to go, and had the opportunity to meet some really wonderful people that are still my friends to this day. Here I go. Just wonderful people. And so I got really emotionally involved with what was going on with the trail and with that community, and so the time came then, as a result of my close proximity to Springer Mountain, decided that I need to go do some hiking on this thing, seriously. So that's relationship between, well, and I don't know if you all have ever been to Nimblewill, but it's a pretty neat little place. There's some old chicken houses there, and a couple old houses, and a beautiful, well-maintained church in Nimblewill. But I lived there for 5 years. My life was totally and completely changed as a result of that. Isn't it amazing how things come along in our life that we have no idea about and certainly no plans for, but end up being such an incredible influence? That's what that was.
I understand your first big hike was 4,400 miles from Florida to Cape Gaspé in Quebec. Would you please talk a little about that?
What crazy part do you want to hear?
Whatever you want to tell.
And it is crazy. I mean, even myself trying to think about it or go back, and I can refresh myself and convince myself that that was something I did because I kept journal entries for every day, and I can go back and read about each of those days. But to try to comprehend or just to wrap your head around something that's of that magnitude, it wasn't a first, I guess, in the hiking community. There's other people that have done great long hikes, much further than what I did, but for some reason it kind of captured the interest of a lot of people, and I was so emotionally involved in it, and I felt so strongly about the influence that the trail had on me that I sat down one day and I started writing, went back through my journal entries, and it looked like perhaps there was a fairly decent book in there someplace. So a year or so after, then I just took a year off and I polished up the original lies that I had in my journal entries a whole lot more. So where those lies actually have become fairly believable today. And so I guess, and I like to shoot my mouth off, I guess, sometimes. There's a trail now known as the Eastern Continental Trail, and I coined that phrase and wrote about it in my book, 10 Million Steps. And there's a lot of folks that have, for some reason or another, that apparently didn't have a life, either started in Key West or went up to Cape Gaspé and hiked that doggone thing. But it's 4,400 miles, and half of that was the Appalachian Trail. Happened to be my first through hike on the AT. Was in the middle of both ends of what that hike originally turned out to be. It made a totally different person out of me. I guess all of you that are in the room here, you're here because you have some interest in hiking and more likely an interest in backpacking. But you all know that when you put a backpack on, there's something that happens that, and we've all tried to figure out what the hell that is, but there's something that happens in our relationship with others, and when we have a pack on, the influence that, just the spirit that comes with that freedom that we experience has on each one of us, and that's just been a profound effect on me for whatever good over time that's produced.
Larry, what would you like to ask him? I will be excusing myself pretty quickly.
Well, I want to talk about my first experience with Nimblewill, and you know, I consider Nimblewill the most charismatic hiker of our generation. And one point after that first hike, Nimblewill called me. We were talking for a while, and I invited him up to the ALDA gathering in Dartmouth, and I really underestimated Nimblewill then. So we booked him for pretty good sized room. Maybe it held 100 people, but it didn't hold enough for me. So I had to sit out in the hall and listen to that talk, sitting on the floor in the hall outside the room. So that gave me an idea of Nimblewill. Why don't you talk a little bit about your Nimblewill and Bart Smith are the first two people to have hiked all the National Scenic Trails, National Historic Trails, and just some miscellaneous things in addition. Why don't you talk a little bit about how you and Bart have hiked together over the years?
Bart, will you come in here, please?
Here he is. You can sit
Come
right
in
here.
here, Bart.
Excellent. Thank you.
This gentleman got on a plane in Seattle and flew all the way to Harrisburg just to be here.
Yep, absolutely. Hey, good to see you, Larry.
There are 11 National Scenic Trails. And up until a few years ago, no one had hiked all 11 of the National Scenic Trails. In your presence here now is a gentleman who was the first person to hike all 11 of our National Scenic Trails, and that was Bart Smith. I got inspiration from that, and I was within 3 or 4 trails of pulling it off, and I'm thinking, what the hell, old man, go for it. So Bart was a great inspiration on my attempt and success at hiking all 11 of the National Scenic Trails. So Bart pulled it off, and I came through behind him, and we were the only ones, I guess, for a number of years that had hiked all 11 of them. But folks, that's just a piddly part of this whole thing. There are 30 national trails, 11 national scenic, 19 national historic trails, most of which are auto tour routes, okay? Now, Bart and I have hiked a bunch of these things together, but there's one person in this world that has done all 19 of our national historic trails, and in addition, our national scenic trails. Bart Smith has hiked all 30 of our national trails. He's been out there and done all 30 of them.
And photographed all of them, too, don't forget that.
Bart is a professional photographer, renowned and hold a candle second to none. He's done some beautiful coffee table books, and one of the most wonderful ones that I'm familiar with, and he signed it for me, and so did Earl. Bart did all the photography for the beautiful coffee table book entitled Calling Me Back to the Hills. So do y'all know who Bart Smith is now?
So let me put in a commercial. We do happen to have a few copies of that book at the museum, and in addition, Bart took a wonderful photograph of Katahdin, and we have that photograph as a fundraiser. It's up on the wall in the museum. It's called the Katahdin Art Project, and Bart for many years has generously been donating his support to the museum. So before Earl died, literally on its deathbed in the hospital, Earl signed cards that we include with that photograph. So we do want to thank Bart for that, and it is available along with Calling Me Back to the Hills at the museum. So sorry about that interruption, but I have to put in a commercial.
Thank you.
You have some of my books too, and the sale of those proceeds go to, just incidentally.
I'm not sure if we have any of Nimblewill's books.
The remaining stock of Calling Me Back to the Hills, that's all
Yeah.
that's in the world.
Oh, so we do have a stock of that. And let me put in another commercial. I did happen to do the introduction for 10 Million Steps. So I endorsed the
Larry and
book.
I go back a ways. That book was written in 2000, so Larry wrote the foreword for that book for me a while back.
Question here
Go ahead.
with Nimblewill. Your first book, I quoted a lot, and that's when you looked in those pretty blue eyes. You were sitting, drinking your chocolate milk.
Can you speak up, please? I'm an old man.
Oh, you're young yet. In your first book, as you were starting out, you were coming through the South, you were appearing for your life, and you were sitting in a rain, it was raining, outside the grocery store, drinking your milk. Car pulled up. Little girl with bright blue eyes, the most beautiful eyes you've ever seen. I wish you could tell me, because I quote that a lot.
Oh, Bart, I mean, it's so embarrassing. How do we deal with all of this?
Yeah, it is a challenge when you hike so much, and people ask you about this, what you did on one day, and
Oh,
it's
so you
just
don't
hard
remember?
to come back.
You don't remember it. Okay, it's when you, and the little girl handed you something.
Oh, for heaven's sakes. Well, yeah, the details, okay. She's sitting at the railroad tracks, and she was one of a number of brothers and sisters and brother-in-laws that had started out the trail, and they called themselves the Fabulous Four. See, now I just needed a couple more clues. They called themselves the Fabulous Four, and they hiked together and just had incredible interrelations of love and caring as family members for a while, but then that started breaking down, and one by one, they left the trail. And I guess I could tell them, if you don't have 10 million steps, you can get one from the museum here, and you can read about that story in 10 million steps. So as time passed on, she ended up being the only one of the four that were left on the trail. And this happened right up here by Pine Grove, I guess is where it was. There's a railroad crossing up here someplace, and she was just sitting at that railroad crossing, and she had her box there, her bounce box or her resupply box, and she said, Nimblewill, she said, I want you to take this and use this for the rest of your hike. She says, I'm the last one of the Fabulous Four, and I'm quitting today too. Well, I saw her a day or so later, and she had just bought a beautiful new pair of Lakey hiking sticks. And, this was at the other Appalachian Trail office that you have over here.
Uh-huh.
And she said, Nimblewill, I want you to have these sticks. And I just broke down. I didn't know what to do. I was learning how to hike with sticks at the time. I had a couple of saplings that were getting wore off. And I finally relented, and I just told her, I said, I'll go ahead, I'll trade you. Just give me your sticks and I'll trade you for mine. It's a sad story about the family, and aren't those the kind of things that kind of tie us together as a community, I guess, too? It makes us all stronger, and and more caring and more understanding. It's just, it was an incredibly emotional time for me. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, and Bart, thanks for adding a little bit of extra information so I could remember what it was. Yeah.
So let me, I don't think we mentioned, Nimblewill set the record as the oldest person to hike the AT. And most through hikes tend to be pretty easy, but I think that one was a little tough. And I should also mention Ron Tipton, who was here yesterday and will be here later today. I'm not sure if he's a friend, Bart, or not, but he's lobbying for the Benton Mackay Trail to be the 12th National Scenic Trail. So
We're gonna do it.
So more work for you guys to do.
We're already talking, we're already talking.
And I have to tell you about a conversation Bart and I had a couple of years ago. He was asking me how many miles the International Appalachian Trail is now. And I told him, it's not official length and that, they have issues routing and stuff. But anyway, about 10,000 miles. And he didn't hang up the phone. So this is one guy who doesn't get intimidated lightly. Nimblewill, talk about a little bit about how difficult these last few hikes have been.
Well, my first AT through hike was just a portion of that 10 million steps. It was just half of what that hike was. And I was in good shape. I was only 60 years old. I was 59, going to turn 60 at the time. So I was young and in good shape then. And I just breezed through the AT. It was no big deal. And then 2 years later, I did a southbound, of the Eastern Continental Trail, which included another through hike of the AT, a southbound, and I pretty much breezed through that. So I got to be friends with a fellow. His name is Graybeard. He came through when I was caretaking Flag Mountain, and I got to know him and spend some time with him. And coincidentally, I found out that he held the age record for being the oldest person to through hike the Appalachian Trail. And the way I found out, he told me, and he knew then about how old I was, and he said, have you thought about doing another hike on the AT? And I'm thinking, in another year or so, I'll be older than you are. Well, you held a record, and we discussed it, and honest to God, he encouraged me. He said, I want you to go ahead and go hike this thing and break my record. So I had all that energy and encouragement behind it, and I'm thinking, man, I blew through that thing in '98, and I just ripped right down it in 2000. I'll just go up there and just whip right through this thing again.
Oh, yeah.
So 262 days later, and I did start that hike at Flag, so that added an extra 400 miles. It was 2,619.4. 262 days on that hike, and I went back and looked through my journals. I had one 3-day running streak. One 3-day running streak in that entire 262 days, Larry, that I hadn't fallen down at least once. I guess there's those of you in the audience here that understand what happens to your balance and reflexes as time passes. So it was a grueling, difficult, really, really tough time.
Well, I
for me,
think,
Brian, it was a hard time, Brian. Yeah.
well, I think Bill Irwin, the first blind hiker, has the record for most falls on the trail. But you might be number 2 on the
Have to
AT.
look that up. See, that would be prestigious.